At 9:30 in the morning on May 1, 1942, a quiet tension filled a converted mess hall aboard Japan's largest battleship. Senior admirals gathered around a gigantic table that mapped every corner of the Pacific Ocean. Wooden blocks marked ships, colored pins showed positions, and the fate of nations depended on the dice that would soon roll across the surface. The mission was simple in theory: lure the American carriers into a trap near Midway Island and destroy them in one decisive strike. If everything worked flawlessly, Japan believed it would force the United States to negotiate peace, secure its conquests, and end the war quickly. Few people in that room imagined how completely the simulated battle would predict disaster, or how the warnings would be ignored. The plan carried the full confidence of the Imperial Navy. For 6 months, Japanese forces seemed unstoppable. Pearl Harbor had been shattered, Singapore fell in record time, and one Allied stronghold after another collapsed under furious assaults. Carriers roamed across the ocean without losing a single ship, supported by highly trained pilots flying the world's most feared fighter. Those victories created a dangerous illusion. If the enemy had failed to stop Japan anywhere, why would anything suddenly change? Success hardened into certainty, and certainty became blindness. Military planners called it victory sickness, though few recognized it at the time. It was the quiet assumption that the next battle would naturally continue the same pattern of triumphs. War games were supposed to prevent that kind of complacency. The simulations aboard the battleship were designed to reveal every logistical problem, every weakness in communication, and every possible flaw in timing. Hundreds of officers spent days moving wooden carriers across the map, while umpires calculated fuel consumption, air operations, reconnaissance coverage, and the consequences of every attack. The system was meant to expose risks before a single real ship left port. But something more subtle was at work. The admirals expected success, and no one wanted to disappoint them. Rear Admiral Mato Magaki, the chief of staff responsible for the plan, served as head umpire. He was brilliant, but he had a stake in proving the operation sound. When dice rolls predicted land-based aircraft striking the carriers at their moment of maximum vulnerability, the results stunned the room. One roll indicated 9 direct hits, enough to sink 2 carriers immediately. Magaki overruled the outcome. He argued the scenario was unrealistic, insisted the attack was unlikely, and declared that one carrier would survive intact. The game continued as if the second ship had never sunk. Later, that supposedly destroyed carrier reappeared on the table during a new phase of operations with no explanation at all. In that moment, the war game stopped being a test and became a rehearsal for a plan everyone already accepted. Junior officers noticed the problem but stayed silent. Speaking against senior command could derail a career, and respectful obedience was part of the Navy's culture. Because of that silence, dangerous assumptions went unchallenged. One possible scenario saw American carriers moving early, taking positions near Midway before Japan arrived, and striking first. Magaki dismissed it instantly. The Americans could not possibly predict the attack, he argued. They would be caught by surprise and rush from Hawaii only after Japan began bombing Midway. The simulation forced the American side to behave according to that assumption, even though the junior players suspected otherwise. By eliminating unwelcome outcomes, the games reinforced the belief that everything would unfold exactly as planned. The irony was that Japan had already lost strategic surprise. Months before the operation, American cryptanalysts broke the Japanese naval code. They knew something major was coming, and they suspected Midway was the target. A clever test confirmed it when a false message about water shortages on the island was transmitted openly. Japanese intelligence repeated the report using the secret code, unknowingly confirming that AF meant Midway. Now the Americans not only knew the target, they knew roughly when the attack would begin. This single advantage turned a decisive ambush into a calculated defense. The second major miscalculation came from the Battle of the Coral Sea. During that fight, American carrier pilots damaged the Japanese carrier Shokaku and devastated the air group of Zuikaku, preventing both from joining the upcoming Midway operation. Japan believed the Americans had lost 2 carriers as well. Lexington sunk and Yorktown heavily damaged beyond repair. That assessment appeared certain. Pilots reported seeing the ships burning, and the Yorktown seemed crippled. But reality was different. The Yorktown limped back to Pearl Harbor, trailing smoke, engines struggling, flight deck torn open. Under normal circumstances, repairs would take months. Instead, Admiral Chester Nimitz ordered the impossible: emergency round-the-clock work, safety regulations set aside, and hundreds of workers swarming the ship for 3 days without rest. The Yorktown sailed out again, barely held together, with repair crews hammering steel plates while she headed to battle. Japan expected 2 carriers. They would face 3. June 4th opened with a predictable rhythm. Japanese aircraft swept over Midway, bombing runways and defensive positions. The initial strikes caused damage, but the island refused to fall silent. American aircraft roared into the air again and again, forcing the Japanese to consider a second attack. Admiral Nagumo began rearming his planes for a renewed strike against the island. Torpedoes were hauled down to the hangar decks, bombs lifted up, and planes repositioned. The decks became crowded with fuel hoses, ammunition, and fully armed aircraft. It was the exact condition the simulations had warned about. Only those warnings had been discarded. At that moment, a delayed scout plane sighted American ships. The message arrived late because of mechanical issues earlier in the morning. That single delay changed the rhythm of the entire battle. Nagumo hesitated, unsure whether to continue preparing for a second land strike or to rearm for ship combat. He changed orders, reversed them, then changed again. Each adjustment meant moving rows of aircraft, clearing munitions, and rushing torpedoes back into place. Confusion rippled through every deck. The carriers were now filled with volatile fuel and explosives at the worst possible moment. American torpedo squadrons attacked first. Their planes were slow, poorly protected, and flying low across the ocean without maneuverability against superior Japanese fighters. They had little chance of survival, yet they charged forward anyway. Torpedo Squadron 8 from one carrier flew directly toward the fleet without fighter escort. One by one, the pilots fell to concentrated fire. Nearly every aircraft was lost. Torpedo Squadron 6 and Torpedo Squadron 3 suffered the same fate. Of 41 torpedo planes that made attack runs that morning, only a handful survived. Not a single torpedo struck home. The sacrifice seemed pointless, and the ocean filled with debris. But their sacrifice achieved something extraordinary. The fighters defending the carriers dove toward sea level to engage the torpedo squadrons, scattering the protective combat patrol over miles of ocean. With attention fixed downward, no one was watching the sky above. American dive bombers arrived from high altitude, almost invisible until the moment they tipped their wings and fell into their dives. Within minutes, bombs crashed into 3 carriers, igniting fuel lines and detonating the weapons stacked below decks. Explosions tore through the interior of Kaga. Flames rolled through Akagi's hangars. Soryu suffered multiple direct hits, and her crew fought fires that spread faster than any damage control team could manage. In the span of 5 minutes, 3 carriers were mortally wounded. The very catastrophe the war games predicted and Agaki rejected was now happening in real time. Hiryu, positioned separately, mounted a last stand. Her aircraft found the Yorktown and struck her twice. Damage control efforts pulled the ship back from the brink, but later torpedoes finally left her drifting. Hiryu, in turn, was located and bombed, joining the other carriers beneath the waves. The Pacific shifted irreversibly in those hours. Japan attempted to hide the disaster from its own people. The carriers were listed as active, survivors were isolated, and families were told nothing of the scale of the loss. Without acknowledging the defeat, officers could not learn from it. Training continued under the illusion that nothing essential had gone wrong. The Navy continued planning as though its original fleet was still intact, even though the experienced pilots lost at Midway could never be replaced. Strategically, the consequences unfolded immediately. Japan had depended on knocking out American carrier power before U.S. industry could build replacements in massive numbers. With 4 Japanese carriers gone and thousands of trained personnel lost, every future battle became harder. Just 2 months later, American forces landed on Guadalcanal, and the struggle turned brutal. Losses mounted for Japan while American factories launched new ships and produced aircraft at a scale previously unimaginable. Each defeat grew heavier, and each replacement pilot was less experienced than the one before. The momentum Japan once had evaporated. Agaki survived the war, carrying the weight of those decisions. He understood the plan had been flawed, yet never accepted full responsibility for allowing optimism to replace honest evaluation. When Japan surrendered, Agaki boarded a bomber for one last unauthorized mission and vanished in the ocean. The moment symbolized a tragic arc, not just of one officer, but of a system unable to question itself. The story of those war games remains a timeless warning. When leaders punish uncomfortable truths, tests become meaningless, and simulations turn into theater rather than tools for survival. The dice predicted disaster because probability does not care about pride. Ignoring those warnings did not prevent the outcome. It made it unavoidable. Real battles punish unsupported assumptions with unforgiving precision, and in just 5 minutes, reality proved that confidence without honesty is the most dangerous enemy of all.